His name was Derek. I won't call him my nemesis because that would have required him knowing who I was. But he was one of those guys who, had it all together, and I was jealous. I mean, he had that perfectly feathered hair. At the time, that was a good thing, and it looked like angels had brushed his hair with their wings every morning. It was like perfect all the time. He always had the coolest clothes. And I would try to emulate him and emulate his look. I remember one fall, it was back to school time, his first football game of the year, and I really been working on my look, and I was so excited for the game. I had shoes on. I knew that Derek owned. My outfit felt like it was on point, and I showed up at the game, and I walked in the gates, and there was Derek, wearing even newer styles, stuff I hadn't even seen yet. His perfectly feathered hair just blowing in the gentle breeze, and he's surrounded by girls, beautiful girls, and on his feet were a pair of Doc Marten boots. And that was the first time I had ever seen Doc Marten boots. They were brand new at the time. They were a really big deal. And I realized once again, it doesn't matter what I'm wearing right now. No one's going to see me. I'm going to be hidden once again in his shadow. He always got the girl. He always had the snappy remark. He always said and did all the right things. And I always wondered, how do you get to be that guy? How do you get all the good stuff in life? I think we struggle against that sometimes, don't we? You likely had your own Derek, someone whose very existence always made you feel like you were less, like they were on top. And for some reason, that's kind of always been the goal, is to be on top. And in fact, I think the world has conditioned us to chase greatness. And greatness in this world is defined by being on top. At sporting events, you often see those giant foam fingers. Does anybody know what finger it's holding up? No, not the one you're thinking of. Yeah, the number one, like pointer finger. We're number one. They made millions of dollars selling these we're number one. Nobody's getting rich off of, we're number two, right? Nobody's selling number two foam fingers. You're never going to see that at a Super Bowl. You're never going to hear the team that loses the Super Bowl chanting on their way out, we're number two. It's just not going to happen. In fact, even when you go in, scientifically proven that we hate second place. We just, in every sport, in every event, we hate second place. Like Olympics, bronze medalists feel like, well, at least they got something. But the silver medal, it's like you got to live with a wound, like you almost won. I was number two. Jerry Seinfeld, he did a stand-up bit. He said, congratulations, you almost won. No one lost ahead of you. Of all the losers, you're top in that category. Like, that's how it feels. In fact, we even call the worst thing that we have to do in the bathroom, what do we call it? Number two. We call it going number two, right? We hate number two. We're conditioned to want the good things in life, to be on top, to be seen as the best at what we do, and to have people look up to us, to have authority in life. And that problem is as old as creation itself, and it can be traced through the pages of Scripture. I'll give you some examples starting at the creation of Adam and Eve. Genesis chapter 3. How were the first two people convinced to sin? How did Satan tempt them to disobey God? He told them they'd be number one, that they'd be like God, that they'd be on top. In fact, Genesis 3, 4-6, the enemy said, you won't die. The serpent replied to the woman, God knows that your eyes will be opened as soon as you eat it, and you'll be like God, knowing both good and evil. And then it says the woman was convinced. She saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious, and she wanted the wisdom it would give her. So she took some of the fruit and ate it. Then she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it too. And they disobeyed because they want to be number one. And from Adam and Eve, we don't make it one generation. We see the desire of one of their sons to be on top of the other. And we see that actually leads to the first murder in history. Cain and Abel both bring an offering to the Lord. Cain brings an offering. Abel brings what's described as his best or his first fruits. And God accepts Abel's offering, but he does not accept Cain's offering. And Cain gets violently angry about this because he wants to be on top. We read in Genesis 4, verse 8 and 9. One day, Cain suggested to his brother, let's go out in the fields. And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Afterward, the Lord asked Cain, where is your brother? Where is Abel? In Fast forward a few generations to Genesis chapter 25 to 27 in a story that sounds made up. This story we read about Esau and Jacob, these two twins who are fighting literally in the womb. Jacob is born second, grasping onto the heel of his brother, so longing to be first, he's grabbing onto his brother's heel. As their lives go on in this century, to be firstborn was everything. You got a double inheritance. You got, to take over the family business. You got to be head of the household when your father dies. That was your birthright. Jacob wanted all of that, and he chased it in his entire life. The real problem's found, though, in verse 27 and 28. It says, as the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter. He was an outdoorsman, but Jacob had a quiet temperament, preferring to stay at home. Now listen, Isaac loved Esau because he enjoyed eating the wild game Esau brought home, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Isaac made Esau number one, Rebekah made Jacob number one, and Jacob is jealous that Esau's number one in his father's eyes. And we talked just recently about how in family doesn't play, love doesn't play favorites. Like you can't put others first when you're striving to be number one. But the good thing is that's Old Testament, right? That's done. Like that would never happen anymore because of Jesus. Now Jesus has come and we don't struggle with that in our world anymore. Well, let's zoom in on Jesus gathering his disciples together. And what you see is that the struggle is not only still present, it hasn't actually even changed much. If you walk through Scripture and you read about Jesus' disciples, you often find them wrestling with the same question. Who among us is the greatest? Who's first? Who's number one? How can I be first? How can I get the best in life? Turn with me, if you will, to Mark chapter 10. This is where we're going to spend our time. If you're using one of our Bibles, we'll be on page 606. If you didn't bring a Bible, you can raise your hand. The ushers would love to bring you one. If you don't own a Bible, please raise your hand. It's our gift to you. And as we enter into this scene with Jesus and his disciples, they're traveling one last time from, to Jerusalem from Galilee. And Jesus knows that he's about to be crucified for the sins of the world. And he's trying to get his disciples to see what's coming. Mark chapter 10, starting with verse 32. They were now on the way up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. The disciples were filled with awe, and the people following behind were overwhelmed with fear. Taking the 12 disciples aside, Jesus once more began to describe everything that was about to happen to him. Listen, he said, we're going up to Jerusalem where the Son of Man will be betrayed to the leading priests and teachers of the religious law. They will sentence him to die and hand him over to the Romans. They will mock him, spit on him, flog him with a whip, and kill him, but after 3 days, he will rise again. Now, from my perspective, and I'm looking at this from the outside looking in, that seems pretty straightforward. But this isn't even the first time Jesus has talked to them about this. The first time is back in Mark chapter 8. Jesus says to his disciples, hey, who do you think I am? And Peter, in this shining moment, says, you are the Christ, the Son of God. And then Jesus says, hey, here's what's about to happen to me. And Peter, who just said, you're the Son of God, puts his foot in his mouth in verse 32. It says, he talked openly with his disciples. Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for saying such things. Jesus turned around and looked at his disciples and then reprimanded Peter. Get away from me, Satan, he said. You're seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's. Peter couldn't see it. See, Peter and the disciples have the wrong perspective. The second time he tries to tell his disciples is after his transfiguration. Peter, James, and John are up at a mountain with Jesus. He's transfigured in front of him. They see him in all his glory. And as they're walking back down the mountain, he says this to him. He says, don't tell anyone until after I'm raised from the dead. And he says it, raised from the dead. And they whisper to each other, what do you think he means by raised from the dead? Like, what's he talking about? They can't see it. And that's the second time they ignore that message. Now they're on their way to Jerusalem. He's about to be crucified, and Jesus is trying one last time, and it's like the disciples just can't hear what he has to say. Their brains, they can't accept it. Jesus has predicted his own death, and James and John approach him. James and John, who heard him 3 times. James and John, who were at the transfiguration when he said, don't tell anyone until after my death. And they walk up to him, verse 35, and they say this. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came over and spoke to him. Teacher, they said, we want you to do us a favor. What is your request, he asked. They replied, when you sit on your glorious throne, we want to sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left. Now, this is where, as a pastor, I'm supposed to be appalled. Like, how could they only think of themselves in this moment? How could they do that? The only problem is I'm not just a pastor. As it turns out, I'm a person too. So I sort of get this. The literal translation here is, we want you to do whatever we ask. And by the way, isn't that what most of us actually want from Jesus? Isn't this why we cry out to him when we're in trouble, but get angry at him when things don't go our way? Isn't this why we doubt God instead of leaning into our relationship with him when things are tested, when our faith is tested, when we face illness or difficulty or loss? Because at the heart of it all, what we truly want from Jesus is just for him to give us whatever we ask for. But did you know that's not actually worship? That's actually idolatry. Idolatry is defined as turning good things into ultimate things. It's replacing God with what we really want, and far too often, what we really want isn't Jesus, it's what we think Jesus can give us. Until we actually become so presumptuous as to ask Jesus to help us worship our idols better. God, I promise I'll do anything. Just help me get an A on this test. Help me get good grades. God, I know I haven't talked to you in a while, but I really need a favor here. I really need a raise at work. God, I promise, I know I've been doing these things that aren't good, but I'll stop doing those things. I promise I'll go to church every Sunday. Please just fix this situation. God, will you just do whatever we ask? Excuse me. Jesus allowed these brothers to display their spiritual shallowness. They said, Jesus, once we get to heaven, we don't want to be second place. I mean, we know you're above all. We get that. But can we be first among your followers? Why not us? Verse 38. But Jesus said to them, you don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the bitter cup of suffering I'm about to drink? Are you able to be baptized with the baptism of suffering I must be baptized with? Oh, yes, they replied. We are able. See, James and John are willing to follow Jesus into glory, but Jesus is calling them to join him in his suffering. When you hear cup and you hear baptism, you may think of the sacraments, and that's not directly what Jesus is referring to here with James and John, though what he is referring to actually makes the sacraments more meaningful. Cup in the Old Testament is a metaphor for experiencing the wrath of God. Jesus is saying, are you ready to share in my fate? Baptism is a picture of dying to yourself and being raised in new life. Jesus is saying, are you willing to join me in my baptism of suffering so that others may receive the baptism as a symbol of new life? And James and John say, yes, we're willing. We'll drink the cup of wrath. We're ready to join you in our suffering. But they don't know what they're saying. The other disciples are upset when they hear about this, not because they think James and John were out of line, but because they're jealous. They want to be on top. They want to be number one. And Jesus gathers his disciples together for a teachable moment in verse 42. So Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you, it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. See, Jesus' call is to join him not in glory, but in his humility. Jesus is asking James and John, he's asking the disciples, do you want to chase the things of the world in the same way the world chases them, or do you want to join me in chasing the things of the kingdom? One of the best summaries of this is in the Beatitudes in Matthew 5, verse 5. It says, God blesses those who are humble, for they will inherit the whole earth. See, if you want to inherit the whole earth, if you want to be on top, you want to be number one, do this, be humble. Choose to humble yourself. If you want to be number one, be the best at being number two, or number three, or number four. This is the heart of this series. Love, walk, do. Focusing on Micah chapter 6, verse 8, where Jesus is essentially doubling down on this message. He says this, know, O people, the Lord has told you what is good, and this is what he requires of you, to do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk how? To walk humbly with your God. Jesus calls us to walk humbly with him. Some translations actually use the word meek, and that causes us to struggle with the idea of humility because our belief is that meekness equals weakness. We assume strength and weakness are opposites, that those who are strong can't be humble and those who are humble can't be strong. And this, what Jesus is teaching, what he's modeling is exactly the opposite of that. I mean, go back to the Garden of Eden, right? To the very beginning when things were being created, Genesis 1, it says, so God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it or subdue it, reign over the fish of the sea, the birds in the sky, and all the animals that scurry along the ground. Again, some translations, fill the earth and subdue it. God is saying, I give you dominion and rule and authority on the earth. I need you to be strong for me. And when we read this is when we realize that weakness and meekness are not the same thing. That strength and weakness are not actually opposites. As I was researching for this sermon, I came across a book by Andy Crouch. The name of the book was Strong and Weak. And in that book, he makes the argument that humility is actually a combination of two key things. Humility is found when we are both high in authority and also high in vulnerability. High in authority, but also high in vulnerability. Authority is the ability to do something about it, to take meaningful action. Vulnerability is the willingness to take risks, to be fully known, to be exposed before God and people for who you really are, and learning to feel safe in the process of trusting. I love this quote from Brene Brown. She says, vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage. This explains why it doesn't come more naturally to us, okay? While we all desire to be strong, we all hate vulnerability. Humility is something we have to work at over time, which is probably why we see God making a huge deal of it. James chapter 4 tells us that God actually opposes the proud, but then gives his grace to those who are humble, that he actually actively resists pride and stubborn selfishness, and he pours out grace on our efforts to be humble and vulnerable. I love these words of C.S. Lewis. He says, if anyone would like to acquire humility, I think, tell him the first step. The first step is to realize that one is proud. And a biggest step too, at least nothing whatever can be done before it. If you think you are not conceited, it means that you are very conceited indeed. See, God created Adam and Eve very intentionally. He gave them authority over creation, and he also made them naked. Why did he do that? And they're naked, they have no shame within that high vulnerability. Now, in the animal kingdom, there's no such thing as nakedness. I know some of you feel like you need to put clothing on your pets. And I'm fine with that. Like, I get that. We can be down with that. But they don't need clothes. Like, if I'm walking my dog and it doesn't have clothes on, no one is disgusted and offended. Oh, I'll put clothes on that. Because their nakedness is an entirely human concept. In fact, when we get embarrassed, we even use that metaphor. I felt so naked. I felt so exposed. But in our original design, God designed us naked, but with no shame. So we're designed for high authority and at the same time, high vulnerability. And what you'll see in this chart from Andy Crouch's book is that when both of these things are present, human beings flourish. God created everything. He said it was good, okay? When he put in us the ability to create things, he created this ability to flourish, to take what is good and make it very good, okay? But we can also take what's good and we can make it very bad, can't we? But God's purpose is that we would bring flourishing about on the earth. So, like, for instance, grain is good, but then we grind it into flour and we make bread. So wheat is good, but bread, let's just be honest, bread is very good. Especially with some butter on there, maybe some apple butter, some jelly, some honey, okay? Or chickens. Chickens lay eggs, that's good. But you crack a few open, whip them together, add some cheese and some bacon, now you got an omelet. And omelets are very good. Or how about this one? I've been entrusted by God with my kids. And even when my kids do bad things, my kids are good. My job as a father is to help them become very good. And that takes both authority and vulnerability. The problem is humanity messed this up early in Genesis, and honestly, we just kind of keep messing it up. So Satan tempts humanity with more authority. Be like God. You can control your own life. You can make your own choices. You can be in charge. And he promises what you all want in life, what we all want, which is high authority, but no vulnerability. Okay? Don't you want that? I don't want vulnerability. I don't like vulnerability. I want to be in charge, but with no consequences. Isn't that what we all want? Do you know what you call people who are high authority and no vulnerability? Exploiters. Exploiters. You see any exploitation happening in our world right now? See, the problem comes, when we reach for this world and we don't get it. Adam and Eve reached for equality with God and they didn't get it, and their eyes were opened and suddenly they saw their nakedness. Now there's nakedness partnered with shame. Their bodies are exposed, but much bigger. Their sins are exposed, and for the very first time, they feel shame. So this whole year, we've been talking about spiritual health and wholeness. Adam and Eve, in this moment, one of the greatest enemies to spiritual health and wholeness is when we feel shame. And Adam and Eve are filled for the first time with shame, and they lose their God-given authority. So now you have high vulnerability, but low authority, which leads to suffering and poverty. We hide, we hold on to a desire to avoid vulnerability, and eventually we end up in a place that's low vulnerability, low authority, and that leads to withdrawal. This simple illustration from Crouch's book opened up this truth for me in my life. To walk humbly with God is to embrace your God-given authority and yet to carry yourself with unbridled vulnerability. Let's look at Jesus' life as an example. Was Jesus low on authority? Nope. All authority was given to him. So how did he use it? Humility. One incredible picture of this is when Jesus is meeting with Pilate, and Pilate asked Jesus, do you know anything about my authority? Do you know who I am? Do you know I have the authority to kill you? I don't even know how Jesus kept his cool at that point. But Jesus, he could have called all the angels in heaven. He could have called, and just emptied heaven after Pilate, but he said to Pilate, you have zero authority if my Father hadn't given it to you. And he modeled a powerful truth for us. Jesus did. The authority given to us from God is designed only to be used for God. So let's go back to James and John and the other disciples for a moment. Verse 42, Jesus called them together and he said, you know that the rulers in this world lord it over the people. High authority, low vulnerability. And officials flaunt their authority over those under them, but among you it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader, whoever wants to have authority among you must be a servant, must have high vulnerability. And whoever wants to be first among you must be a slave of everyone else. For even the Son of Man, even Jesus himself, came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. The Son of God came with all authority, but in incredible vulnerability. He came in humility. He willingly put himself below you and me. He surrendered to every insult, to every injury, to an unjust trial, a brutal beating, and each nail of the cross because he came to serve and to give his life as a ransom, because God's plan has always been high authority and high vulnerability at the same time, which always leads to the deepest human flourishing. We lie to ourselves and we tell ourselves that if I'm vulnerable, that will equal loss of respect. But what I've learned in my life is that vulnerability breeds respect and authority. I mean, think about the cross. Do you respect Jesus less because of the cross? Of course not. I love Jesus' definition of greatness so much because it means everyone can be great. It means everyone can be great because everyone can choose to be a servant. It doesn't matter education or age or gender or race or socioeconomic status. None of that determines who is great and who is not. All you need to be great in the kingdom of God is to walk humbly with your God. Among you, Jesus said, it will be different. It will be different. The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many, and he commands us to do the same. Now listen, I understand how hard this can be. Life is full of Derricks. You've got your own, I've got my own. I'm still healing, apparently. Walking humbly is about coming to the realization, I'm not expected to be anyone other than me. God never wanted me to be a Derrick. He wanted to be me, set free to be who he made me to be. And in all I am, he wanted me to be like his son, Jesus. And the best place to start this journey toward humility is in prayer. Humbling ourselves before our Heavenly Father and saying to him, Father, whatever you say, I'll do. Whoever you want me to be, God, that's who I want to be. So I want you to close your eyes. We're going to take a quiet moment right now to do that. I want you to put your hands in your lap, palms up, open-handed before God. I want you to open your heart like your hands are open. And I'm going to give you just a quiet moment. I want you to pray for humility. God, whatever you want, we're yours. Help us walk humbly with you.